Welcome classic rock fans to an episode of Classic Album Review, where classic albums are excavated and explored. And today we're looking at Fresh Cream by Cream. If you're new to this channel, please be sure to click like, subscribe and do all that other stuff, and check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done here at Classic Album Review. The British blues rock trio Cream were perhaps the first band to be labelled a sensational supergroup by Melody Maker on the 11th of June 1966. I mean, the very name itself is a pun on top shelf musicians. And this, their debut, Fresh Cream, of course, was produced by Robert Stigwood and includes a fusion of different genres described by David Frick as a revolutionary union of zealous roots, outright chart ambition and protean improvisation. And these genres range from a hybrid of blues and hard rock to a smidgen of psychedelia as well, especially on this album. Of course, the more psychedelic textures begin to emerge more profoundly on the follow-up album. I think it's fair to say, as a band, their career was fairly short-lived in the late 60s, but they sent out signals into the rock ether, of course, that would reverberate for decades. And these three musicians, hailing from John Mayall's Blues Breakers, Manfred Mann and the Graham Bond organisation, created something very, very special. Recordings that would bristle with experimental energy to the point they almost had a feral quality. There was something about their sound, in the words of one commentator, that scrutinised the purity and righteousness of the British blues movement. The band itself was a shambling and diverse collection of personalities that was fractious, to say the least. Contemporary influences as well included blues and jazz, without a doubt. Clapton described their music in '66 as both blues, ancient and modern. And they drew their influences from a whole plethora of uber coolness. Skip James' 1931 Paramount classic I'm So Glad, Dr. Ross's Cat Squirrel, to the whimsical romantic introspection of Wrapping Paper, all wrapped up in that music hall piano. You could describe it as a jazz shuffle. What a strange, eclectic band they were. What distinguishes Cream from their contemporaries? We get Ginger Baker's octopusing thud, a drummer who was no doubt an influence on John Bonham, as well as Neil Peart, as well as also cited him as an influence. We get those wonderful, remarkable bass runs from Jack Bruce and exquisite guitar lines from Eric Clapton. But for me, it's not so much the musical virtuosity, but it's the vocals. I think Jack Bruce was an incredible singer. Ginger Baker was heavily influenced by jazz, and then we get a lot of improvisations with his style of drumming as well. Noted for using a variety of different percussive elements, even African rhythms, I believe. Then we get Jack Bruce, who started off playing the double bass for Blues Incorporated, which I think morphed into the Graham Bond organisation. And the Graham Bond organisation were a rhythm and blues outfit that released a couple of albums and a few singles, if I'm not mistaken. Then we get Eric Clapton, of course, who achieved some fame, of course, with the Yardbirds, who left the Yardbirds for the less commercial John Mayall's Blues Breakers. When it came to leaving John Mayall, I heard that John Mayall actually read about it in the papers rather than hearing it from Clapton himself. My word, he must have been over the moon about that. But this album is undeniably grounded in this heavy blues sound, drawing upon all these three eclectic influences and threads. Many people argue that this album was effectively lost in the technicolor blaze that was Sgt. Pepper, as well as the studio ingenuity that represented the Pet Sounds album. In 1966, music was moving into the studio. Nevertheless, this band and this album kicked open the doors to lots of experimental rock music that was to come much later on. This is an influential album. Many argue that it helped spawn the burgeoning heavy metal scene. And the standout moments in this album have now become enmeshed in the common vernacular of rock and roll. This was a pioneering shift forward with an emphasis on performance, I think. As I said, at a time when music was kind of moving itself into the studio. And electric blues was this band's turf. Not the more purist stuff that John Mayall pursued, but one speckled by the bright lights of the burgeoning counterculture. And the rhythm section of Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker had a distinctly jazzy feel. One critic has described their sound as spongy, which of course gave a lot more room in these long improvisational jams for different musicians to express themselves. And there's no better example of that freedom to roam, fluidity, than on the track Spoonful, of course. The swirling instrumental interplay, the echo fuzz tones and overwhelming volume music, this psychedelic experience in a very overwhelming and bludgeoning manner, easily pointing the way for an artist like Hendrix and that guitar-centered iconography that would become heavy metal. And Jack Bruce also reveals himself to be quite an inventive psychedelic songwriter, pop songwriter even. You get the colourful NSU and the hook and harmony-laden I Feel Free, beautifully accompanying, of course, the words of Pete Brown. In fact, as regards this band, if you'll forgive me for quoting at length, Stephen Thomas Erlewine writes, Cream shows as much force and mastery on these tighter, poppier tunes as they do on the free-flowing jams, yet they show a clear bias towards the long-form blues numbers, which makes sense. They form to be able to pursue the freedom which they do so without restraint. Cream was feeling their way forward, creating their heavy psychedelic jazz blues and in the process opening the door to all kinds of serious rock music that may not have happened without this album. This album bristles and crackles with life, that breathy a cappella of I Feel Free, their breakthrough single, I believe. It was a song that was included on the American version of the LP, replacing a Spoonful. And that cover of the Willie Dixon number Spoonful is a remarkable jam, even more impressive on that live box set that came out a year or so ago. I mean, the dueling guitar, the harmonica leads and the frenzied rhythm in that song's midsection is worth the price of admission alone. It's absolutely incredible. And that heavy jazz blues and some psychedelic infused pop numbers, many argue, leaves this album feeling somewhat imbalanced, especially in the original stereo mix. The original stereo mix is absolutely dreadful, I think. The mono mix packs much more punch and power. This record is a historically important document, perhaps no more important than what the Yardbirds were doing. I mention it because I think it's very easy to overlook how important this album was, how important this band were. It's an album of two halves. The psychedelic rock songs is the better half as far as I'm concerned. I Feel Free, NSU, Dreaming, they showcase the songwriting. Clapton is of course remarkable on this. Clapton is God, proclaimed Nietzsche. Well, he didn't really, but I'm sure he would have wanted to. And of course the wonderful percussive pyrotechnics of Ginger Baker, who have no doubt inspired numerous drum solos at numerous gigs for the next 30 or 40 years that had us all running to the bar for some light refreshment. And of course, who could forget that lumpy thud of Toad? I find the blues half not as impressive, as it doesn't really build upon or add to what these band members had already achieved with John Mayall personally. Disraeli Gears was a quantum leap forward, but there's no doubt that this album lays the foundations for something very, very special. So we think about the tracks on this album. We get I Feel Free, which is on the US version of the album, as I've said. And we get the track I Feel Free, which featured on the American version of the album, as I've said. It's a song that demonstrates the value of harmonic contrast, with all Clapton, Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce all contributing to the vocals. And that being said, it's probably the most impressive humming ever committed to vinyl, humming that foreshadows the melody. Bjork famously said that singing is a celebration of oxygen, and nowhere is this more apparent than on this track. And Clapton's solo beautifully complements the harmonic structure of this song, all supporting the exquisite words of Pete Brown. Then we get NSU, described by Jack Bruce as an early punk song. This one opens the UK version of the album, if I'm not mistaken. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of the rock and roll lifestyle and the unguarded urethra. However, the lyrics speak nothing of that burning sensation, but more of a meditation on the desire to enjoy all the pleasures life has to offer. Even if it ends with your young guitarist dosed up on penicillin. Nevertheless, excellent driving drums and guitar on this one, with a whining, wailing vocal line from Jack Bruce. Dreaming is a ballad set to a vocal duet with Jack Bruce and Eric Clapton. One critic has said that it's set to a backdrop of calming strumming right out of the late 50s, giving the song a nice nostalgic mood. It's a nice waltz, really, which never kind of achieves the sugary, ethereal quality it aspires to. A nice call and response leading to the harmonic melding of the verses is kind of intriguing. Then we get Sleepy Time. There's this whole burgeoning subculture of kind of sleep music, especially as the world in the late 60s became more narcotized, shall we say. Nowhere near as good as the Beatles' I'm Only Sleeping, but it certainly marks an interest in writing about states of mind, rather than just that girl-boy stuff and all those sickly adolescent yearnings. Perhaps we have Dylan to thank for raising that particular bar. The song was actually co-written by Jack Bruce and his wife Janet Godfrey, and it serves as a perfect platform for Clapton's full blues mode, of course supported by the solid rhythmic thrum of Ginger Baker and Bruce. Cat Squirrel with Jack Bruce on bass and harmonica, some wonderful improvisational stuff going on here. And you get this ad-libbed scat as well, although I think Tull's version is actually better in my opinion. But it does demonstrate how well these players meshed. For Until Late is a light arrangement of a Robert Johnson song, with Clapton taking the lead vocals on this one. And Spoonful, which features on Wheels of Fire, of course provides this wonderful platform, this opportunity for improvisation. As I've said, the live version on the Goodbye box set is absolutely phenomenal. Disc 1, I think, check that one out. But the studio version is rather pedestrian, that has to be said, in comparison to the way this track was performed in concert. You get Rolling and a Tumbling, which is a Muddy Waters number if I'm not mistaken. You get some wonderful harmonica work on this. That call and response exchanges is also excellent. I'm So Glad, the remake of the Skip James early 1930s spiritual, is one of those songs that helps define this album. Combining complex rhythm guitar riffs along with that funky bass line, intense jazz drums and that fast bass bluesy guitar lead, all topped off of course by that excellent lead vocal hook and well delivered harmonies. Toad is an instrumental foray defined by that long drum solo by Ginger Baker. This is a track that's perhaps well ahead of its time and no doubt copied by numerous drummers afterwards. And Sweet Wine, you get those psych-tinged lyrics which offer a brief glimpse of what was to come later. This one has long been beloved by Cream fans because of its interesting and assertive vocal pattern at the start. Ginger Baker was outstanding here, displaying both subtlety and nuance, as well as power, remaining in full command of its multiple tempos. This debut captures one of those seismic moments in rock where blues, rock and pop begins to meld, producing something that's brand new, and it's now that has to be in anybody's collection. The version I have is this one. This is the deluxe edition that came out a few years ago. And what made this interesting for me is the new stereo mixes, because I think the original stereo mix of this album was absolutely dreadful. But there we go. Cream, fresh cream, what an album, eh? Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you've watched to this point without switching off, I want to thank you for doing just that. Maybe go a step further by making sure you've liked and subscribed, and check all those wonderful, wonderful links below this video, including liking the Facebook page. I do put stuff up there now and again. If you've got a minute more, do check out some of the cards that are now appearing up here. And other than that, I hope you're all well, staying safe and COVID-free, but more importantly, that you keep listening.